The Ramirez family was the perfect model of unity and harmony. In a small town where everyone knew everyone else, Luis and Marta lived with their 19-year-old daughter, Claudia, in a house that radiated warmth and love. Luis was a hard-working man, dedicated to his job as a high school teacher, while Marta, loving and devoted, took care of the home. Claudia, the only daughter, was the pride of her parents, a charming young woman, full of energy and with a bright future ahead of her. Often on weekends, the family was visited by Diego, Luis' younger brother. Diego was Claudia's favorite uncle, a charismatic and kind man in his 40s, single and childless, who enjoyed spending time with his niece. Since Claudia was a child, Diego had been a close and protective figure in her life. He brought her gifts, helped her with her schoolwork, and encouraged her to pursue her dreams. On the surface, they were a happy family, united by strong bonds. However, beneath that facade, tensions began to arise that no one could have foreseen. Diego had a special relationship with Claudia, much closer than the typical one between an uncle and his niece. Since she was little, Claudia had seen in him a figure of support and trust. Diego, for his part, had always shown a genuine interest in her, although sometimes he seemed to overstep the boundaries. When Claudia turned 19, something changed. Diego began to behave differently. What had previously been simple jokes or affectionate comments became more personal, more invasive. Luis and Marta didn't notice it at first, but Claudia did. Although she tried to ignore it, she couldn't help but feel uncomfortable at times. Diego, for his part, couldn't stop watching his niece. He saw her transform from a teenager into a young woman, and his feelings, which until then had been fraternal, began to change. That transformation awakened in him a desire that he tried to repress, but which soon became an obsession. Over time, Diego began to look for excuses to be closer to Claudia. He insisted on helping her with her studies, invited her out for coffee, and offered to drive her to her activities. Luis and Marta, trusting him completely, saw nothing wrong with his behavior. To them, Diego was simply a loving and dedicated uncle. However, Claudia began to notice signs that worried her. Sometimes, Diego's glances lasted longer than usual. Other times, his jokes had a tone that she couldn't decipher. Although she tried to convince herself that they were her imagination, she couldn't ignore the growing discomfort she felt. Diego's obsession with Claudia began to manifest itself in more obvious ways. He became jealous when she talked about boys or mentioned a close friend. One afternoon, while the family was gathered for a meal, Claudia mentioned that a classmate from her university had asked her out. Diego, visibly upset, commented sarcastically, "I hope that boy knows that he has high standards to meet." Although everyone laughed, Claudia sensed something odd in his tone. It was as if Diego felt entitled to comment on her love life. Over time, Diego began sending her out-of-context messages. At first, they were innocuous comments, asking her how she was or what she had done that day. But soon, the messages began to become more personal, more insistent. "You are so special, Claudia. Sometimes I wonder if anyone really deserves you." Claudia, uncomfortable, tried to ignore him. But Diego did not stop. Even though Claudia tried to keep things normal, the signs of Diego's obsession were becoming more and more evident. One afternoon, while they were alone in the living room, Diego got too close while showing her something on his phone. Claudia felt his hand intentionally brush against hers. "Diego, I think you should keep a little distance," she said, trying to sound calm. Diego stepped back, pretending to be surprised. "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to make you uncomfortable. I'm just here to help you, Claudia. But that wouldn't be the last time something like this would happen." Meanwhile, Luis and Marta still didn't notice anything out of the ordinary. Marta, in particular, saw Diego as a trustworthy and loving brother. She never suspected that his intentions towards Claudia might be inappropriate. Luis, for his part, was too busy with his work to pay attention to the small changes in the family dynamic. Diego took advantage of this trust to continue getting closer to Claudia. He knew that as long as he kept up appearances, no one would suspect him. With each passing day, Diego's obsession with Claudia grew. He spent hours looking at her photos on social media, looking for any excuse to see or talk to her. He even started showing up unexpectedly in places where he knew she would be. One afternoon, while Claudia was at the park with some friends, Diego suddenly appeared, claiming to be passing by chance. "Isn't it strange that you're always around me?" Claudia asked, half joking, half serious. I just want to take care of you. You're my favorite niece, Diego replied, with a smile that failed to reassure her. The Real breakup occurred during a family gathering at the Ramirez home. It was a celebration for Marta's birthday, and Diego had insisted on staying late to help with the cleaning. While Luis and Marta were busy in the kitchen, Diego found a moment alone with Claudia. Claudia, I want to tell you something important, he said, in a tone that made her tense. What's wrong, uncle? He asked, trying to sound unconcerned. Diego stared at her, with an intensity that made her back away. You're more than a niece to me. I can't stop thinking about you. Horrified, Claudia pushed him away and ran out of the room. She didn't say anything to her parents, but she couldn't sleep that night. She knew something was terribly wrong, but she didn't know how to face it. Claudia decided to avoid Diego as much as possible. She began to reject his messages and make up excuses not to be around him. However, Diego didn't give up. Her obsession was too strong, and he was willing to do whatever it took to be near her. The Ramirez family went about their daily lives, never imagining that the storm was about to break. Claudia knew she couldn't keep the secret for long, but she feared that if she spoke, the consequences would be devastating. Diego's obsession with Claudia had reached a critical point. Every day he felt more attracted to her, unable to control the thoughts that tormented him. For her part, Claudia lived in a constant state of anguish. Although she tried to avoid it, the constant insinuations and approaches of her uncle put her in an increasingly vulnerable position. Claudia began to distance herself from her parents. She was afraid to tell them what was happening, because she did not want to break the family harmony. At night, she locked herself in her room, looking for some way to distract herself from the situation. But Diego did not give her a break. He continued sending her messages, looking for any excuse to see her. You seem distant, Claudia. Is something wrong? Marta asked her one night while they were preparing dinner. No, Mom, I'm fine. I've just been busy with college, Claudia replied, avoiding eye contact. Marta accepted the answer without question, but couldn't help but notice that something wasn't right. One night, Diego found a perfect opportunity to get closer to Claudia. He knew that Luis and Marta would be out for a few hours, so he decided to visit her. Claudia, hearing the doorbell, thought it was her parents who had forgotten something, but upon opening the door, she found Diego. What are you doing here? She asked, alarmed. I just wanted to see you. I'm worried about you, Claudia. I feel like you're avoiding me. Claudia tried to remain calm. I'm busy, man. You should go before my parents get back. But Diego didn't move. Instead, he entered the house, closing the door behind him. I just want to talk, he said as he advanced towards her. Despite his attempts to keep his distance, Diego managed to break through Claudia's defenses. His persistence, combined with his ability to emotionally manipulate her, made her give in. What started as a tense conversation ended in physical contact that crossed all boundaries. After that night, everything changed. Diego took every opportunity to be alone with Claudia. His visits became more frequent, and he always found an excuse to stay when Luis and Marta were away. This has to stop, Diego. It's too much, Claudia told him one afternoon after one of their encounters. I can't stop, Claudia. I need you. Claudia, trapped in a cycle of guilt and fear, didn't know how to get out of the situation. Although she knew what was happening was wrong, she feared the consequences of telling anyone. Over time, Marta began to notice that something strange was happening between Claudia and Diego. Although she had always trusted her brother-in-law, some details began to raise suspicions. For example, Diego spent more time at her house than usual and always seemed to look for a way to be alone with Claudia. One afternoon, while cleaning her daughter's room, Marta found her diary hidden under the mattress. Although she knew she shouldn't read it, curiosity got the better of her. What she found left her frozen. Claudia had written about the encounters with Diego, expressing her guilt and fear. This can't be happening, Marta muttered, slamming the diary shut. Although she was horrified, she decided not to confront them right away. Instead, she began to observe them more closely, looking for confirmation of what she had read. Claudia lived in a constant state of paranoia. She was afraid that her parents would find out what was happening, but at the same time she couldn't stop herself. Every time Diego looked for her, she tried to reject him, but her uncle always found a way to emotionally manipulate her. If you push me away, I don't know what I'll do. I can't live without you, Claudia, he would tell her, tears in his eyes. Claudia, confused and vulnerable, gave in again and again. Meanwhile, Luis began to notice changes in Marta's behavior. His wife, who had always been cheerful and talkative, was now quiet and reserved. Is something wrong, Marta? You seem different, she asked one night. No, nothing. I'm just tired, Marta replied, avoiding going into details. Luis didn't insist, but decided to pay more attention to what was happening at home. The final discovery came one afternoon, when he returned early from work. Upon entering the house, he heard noises coming from Claudia's room. When he opened the door, he found Diego and his daughter together, in a situation that left no room for doubt. Luis, beside himself, lunged at Diego, pushing him against the wall. What the hell are you doing with my daughter? He shouted, while Claudia cried inconsolably. Diego tried to defend himself, but Luis didn't give him time. You're a sick bastard. Get out of my house right now. Diego, beaten and humiliated, ran out of the house. Claudia tried to explain herself, but Luis was too upset to listen to her. I don't want to hear anything. This ends here. After that incident, the family dynamic changed drastically. Luis forbade Diego from coming near his house again and threatened to report him to the police. However, Claudia knew that her uncle would not stop so easily. Diego, for his part, was devastated. His obsession with Claudia had not diminished, and the thought of losing her consumed him. This can't end like this, he wrote in a text message. I will do anything to be with you. Claudia, scared, decided to block his number, but Diego found other ways to communicate with her. He would show up unexpectedly at her university, follow her when she went out with friends, and leave notes in her mailbox at home. Luis, seeing how Diego's presence continued to affect his daughter, made a drastic decision. He knew he couldn't trust the authorities to solve the problem, so he decided to act on his own. This can't continue. I have to protect my family, he thought, as he began to plan his next move. Luis couldn't sleep. Since the day he discovered his brother with Claudia, his mind had been dominated by thoughts of anger and despair. Although he had managed to keep Diego out of his house, he knew his presence continued to lurk. Claudia was becoming more and more withdrawn, and Marta, although trying to remain calm, was also showing signs of distress. Luis knew he had to protect his family, even if it meant taking extreme measures. Luis first tried to act rationally. He spoke to Claudia about the possibility of reporting Diego, but she flatly refused. Dad, I can't. If I do, the whole town will know what happened. I don't want them to look at me as if it were my fault. Luis understood her fear, but the frustration of not being able to do anything was consuming him. Day after day, he thought of ways to stop Diego, until one night, sitting in the dark of the living room, he came to a conclusion. The only way to solve the problem was to eliminate him. Luis knew he couldn't act impulsively. If he wanted to get his way, he had to plan every detail carefully. For weeks, he followed Diego, studying his movements and routines. He discovered that he used to spend the evenings in a small bar on the outskirts of the town, where he stayed until late at night. He decided that this would be the perfect place to carry out his plan. Luis began looking for information on how to make it look like an accident. He read about methods to avoid leaving traces and began gathering the materials he would need. Meanwhile, the relationship between Luis, Marta, and Claudia was deteriorating. Marta had noticed that Luis was more distant and reserved, and she suspected that he was up to something. One night, while they were having dinner, she decided to confront him. Luis, what's going on? I know you, and I know you're planning something. Luis stared at her, but didn't answer. If you're going to do something stupid, tell me now. I can't stand any more secrets in this house. Luis finally gave in and confessed his plan. Marta, horrified, tried to convince him that there were other ways to handle the situation, but he didn't want to listen to her. Diego isn't going to stop. If I don't do something now, our family will never be safe. Marta, although devastated, knew that Luis was determined. One night, when Diego left the bar, he found Luis waiting for him in the parking lot. Luis pretended to want to talk to him to sort things out. I just want you to disappear from our lives, Diego. This has to end. Diego, still somewhat drunk, tried to justify his actions. You don't understand what I feel. I love Claudia. Those words were the straw that broke the camel's back. Luis, filled with rage, hit him with a wrench he had hidden in his jacket. Diego fell to the ground, stunned but still conscious. Luis, without thinking twice, continued to hit him until he stopped moving. Then he dragged the body to his car, drove to a secluded spot and left it there, making it look like a robbery gone wrong. The next day, news of Diego's murder spread through the town. The police began an investigation, but they didn't have many clues about what had happened. Luis, although nervous, did his best to act normal. However, Marta couldn't bear the weight of what she knew. Although she understood her husband's reasons, she couldn't help but feel guilty for having kept silent. "What if they discover us, Luis? I can't live with this." "No one will, Marta. This was necessary." Claudia, who until then didn't know what had happened, became suspicious when she heard her parents arguing one night. She decided to confront them, demanding answers. "I know something happened with Uncle Diego. What are they hiding?" Marta, unable to lie to her, confessed the truth. "Your father. He did it for you, Claudia. To protect you." Claudia couldn't believe what she was hearing. Although she hated what Diego had put her through, she didn't want her father to become a murderer because of her. "This isn't right. No matter what he did, we couldn't do justice this way." Distraught, Claudia made a decision that would change their lives forever. She went to the police and confessed what she knew, pointing to her father as responsible for Diego's death. Luis was arrested that same night. Although he tried to deny the accusations at first, he eventually admitted his guilt. "I did it to protect my family. I don't regret it." Luis's trial was an event that shocked the town. Details of the case, including Diego's abuse of Claudia, came to light, dividing public opinion. Some saw Luis as a hero who had done what was necessary to protect his daughter, while others considered him a murderer who had taken justice into his own hands. Luis was convicted of murder and sentenced to 25 years in prison. Claudia and Marta tried to rebuild their lives after the trial, but the shadow of what had happened was always present. Claudia felt guilty for having denounced her father, but she knew she had done the right thing. "Dad protected me, but now I have to live with this," she told Marta, through tears. Marta, for her part, visited Luis in prison regularly, although each visit was a reminder of everything they had lost as a family.